Imagine standing in a courtroom where justice is meant to prevail, only to watch it slip through your fingers because of bias and power. A black woman, strong and determined, found herself on the receiving end of a judge's unlawful decision that threatened to crush her spirit. It was a ruling so unjust, it shook everyone in the room. But this wasn't the end of her story. What happened next defied all expectations. The very next day, the tables turned in a way no one could have imagined, leaving the same courtroom in awe as she returned, not as a victim, but as someone who would reshape the meaning of justice. What caused this dramatic shift? And how did this woman rise above such unfair odds? Stick around because this is a story of courage, redemption, and the power of resilience that will leave you inspired. The courtroom had been packed that day, with tension hanging in the air. The woman, a hardworking mother and community leader, had come seeking what she deserved, fairness. But when the judge delivered his decision, it was clear that her race played a role in the ruling. It wasn't just about what was said, it was about the way it was said. There was a weight to his words, a dismissal of her rights that left her speechless. The room was silent, but her heart was pounding. She had done everything right. She had followed the law, played by the rules, and yet here she was, facing an unjust verdict. As she left the courtroom, a mix of disbelief and fury boiled inside her. How could this happen? She knew she couldn't just let it go. This wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had been wronged in similar ways. The fight wasn't over. That night, she couldn't sleep. The events of the day replayed over and over in her mind, each moment growing more and more infuriating. Her friends and family had rallied behind her, offering support, but even they knew the road ahead would be treacherous. They all understood what was at stake. This wasn't just about her case. It was about exposing a larger system of injustice. She wasn't the first to face this kind of discrimination, and sadly, she wouldn't be the last if things didn't change. She needed to stand up, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been pushed aside or silenced. Meanwhile, the judge's decision wasn't going unnoticed either. Whispers had started circulating, and there were those who believed he had crossed a line. Some questioned his integrity, while others argued that his actions were part of a wider pattern of bias that affected countless people, particularly those from marginalized communities. There was talk of petitions, protests, and legal appeals, but for now, no one seemed sure what would happen next. The next morning, the woman made a bold decision. She wasn't just going to fight her case in court. She was going to make her voice heard on a much bigger stage. She reached out to a local civil rights group, and soon they were working together on a strategy to ensure the truth came to light. But she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something much larger was at play. Someone, or something, was pushing this injustice forward. Would she be able to uncover it before it was too late? As the days went on, the pressure only mounted. The woman's courage began to shine through, but so did the forces that sought to keep her down. The civil rights group worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, filing complaints, and organizing community support. But the opposition was just as relentless, using every legal loophole and technicality they could find to keep the judge's ruling intact. The woman knew the stakes had risen beyond just her case. This was about challenging an entire system of oppression that had long been overlooked. But as she prepared for the next hearing, the unease in her gut grew heavier. There was something more at play, something darker. She could feel it. Her phone rang late one night. It was a tip, a warning. Someone in the legal system had leaked information, suggesting the judge's ruling might not have been a mistake after all. Someone had been pulling strings from behind the scenes, and the woman was now caught in a dangerous game she hadn't expected. The walls were closing in, and time was running out. She could no longer trust everything she had been told, And the deeper she dug, the more she realized how tangled this web of injustice really was. The next day, as the court date loomed, the pressure reached its peak. The woman stood at the edge of a precipice, her resolve tested like never before. Her every move was being watched, and she knew that the moment she walked into that courtroom, it would be a battle for everything: her future, her community, and the very idea of fairness. The courtroom doors creaked open the next morning, and the woman stepped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. It was showtime. She had prepared for this moment for weeks, but nothing could have prepared her for what awaited her. As her lawyer briefed her quietly, a strange murmur spread through the room. The judge, the very same one who had made the unlawful ruling, was nowhere to be seen. In his place was a new judge, someone with a reputation for being tough, unyielding, and fair. It didn't take long for her to realize that this wasn't a coincidence. Just as the proceedings began, a hush fell over the room. The new judge wasted no time in addressing the elephant in the room, the original ruling. He acknowledged the growing public outrage and hinted at an internal investigation into the judge's conduct. But before anyone could process what was happening, a surprising turn took place. The original judge was suddenly under investigation, not just for his ruling, but for corruption. A second layer of deception had been uncovered, and it seemed the judge had been involved in more than just this one case. The woman's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just about her anymore. Her case was the tip of an iceberg, and the corruption ran deep. If this all came out in court, it could shake the very foundations of the local justice system. But the more she learned, the more she realized that this new judge, despite his reputation, might not be entirely what he seemed. Was this a chance for true justice, or was it another carefully placed pawn in a much bigger game? The room was filled with tension as the stakes rose even higher. Everything was hanging in the balance. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the new judge, with a calm but firm demeanor, began to dismantle the original ruling piece by piece. The woman's heart raced, each word spoken seeming to push her closer to the justice she had fought for. It was working. Her lawyer stood by her side, offering quiet encouragement, but even he couldn't mask his own shock as the judge openly criticized the prior decision and the evidence of corruption that had surfaced. It felt surreal, like the world was suddenly turning in her favor after so much time spent fighting against it. As the minutes ticked by, the tension shifted. The courtroom grew silent when the judge dropped the final bombshell. He had ordered a full investigation into not just the original ruling, but the entire legal network surrounding it. The truth was starting to spill out, and it looked like the system that had failed her would finally have to answer. But then, just as victory seemed within her grasp, a twist none of them had seen coming unfolded. The original judge, in a desperate move to protect himself, made a last-minute appeal to a higher court, claiming that his ruling had been misinterpreted and that he had acted under pressure from external sources. The twist caught everyone off guard. How could this be happening after everything that had been uncovered? Was there still more to this story than they had thought? For a moment, the woman's optimism wavered. The battle wasn't over yet. The stakes had risen even higher, and now, with everything on the line, she had to brace herself for the ultimate fight. A fight not just for her, but for justice itself. But the fire that had burned inside her since that first moment of injustice wouldn't be easily extinguished. The courtroom may have gone quiet, but in her mind, the real war was just beginning. As the days passed, the case took another surprising turn. The higher court, after reviewing all the evidence, ruled in the woman's favor, declaring the original judge's decision completely unjust. Not only was the ruling overturned, but the corruption charges against the judge were confirmed, leading to an immediate suspension. The woman's victory wasn't just a personal triumph. It sent shockwaves throughout the justice system. Her courage had sparked a larger movement, one that urged people to stand up against bias and inequality wherever it existed. In the end, the woman walked away with more than just legal victory. She had exposed cracks in a broken system, reminded everyone of the power of resilience, and paved the way for real change. Her story became an inspiration, showing that no matter the odds, standing up for what's right can make all the difference. The battle wasn't easy, but in the end, justice had prevailed.